Inside Politics here on KTN News. Many thanks for staying with us. In what might signal a start to more stringent anti-COVID-19 measures, Kenyans have unfortunately come up with ingenious tricks to try and beat curfews and movement restrictions. One of the latest incidents involves a group that traveled from Nairobi to Homa Bay pretending to go for a funeral, complete with an empty coffin. It turns out their driver was COVID-19 positive, part of the latest statistic released by the Health Ministry that now brings Kenya's total number of confirmed coronavirus infections to 262. Here is our Mark Namaso with the details.
Some Kenyans now seem so keen on escaping quarantine zones that they will do anything to avoid confinement.
I am aware, for example, that in the county of Mandela, there are people, and this has been confirmed to me by the governor, that there are people who bribe their way out of quarantine. Both those who did that and those who let them off will face the full force of the law.
Another group of Kenyans from Nairobi also managed to dupe seemingly serious security officers all the way to Homa Bay, masquerading as mourners.
Somebody got suspicious, and on opening the coffin, obviously found out what I am now informing you. They were immediately put in quarantine, and today I can confirm that the driver is positive.
And theatrics by such citizens have now cumulatively driven up COVID-19 cases in Kenya by 16 over the past one day.
We have doubled our testing capacity to test 1,115 samples. Out of these, 16 have tested positive for the coronavirus disease. We are now 262, the number of confirmed cases in our country.
9 out of these 16 cases were detected in Nairobi, 5 in Mombasa, 1 in Homa Bay, and the other being a foreigner. All cases were detected outside quarantine facilities, possibly indicating transmission is firmly in the community transmission phase.
There are 6 cases in the Kirimani area. We have 3 we have picked from the Kawangware area. Karen has 5 people. Pipeline Estate has 5 individuals. Utawala has 4. Mulolongo, we got somebody.
Among the 12 dead so far from COVID-19 in Kenya include an imam in Isli and an 84-year-old herbalist. Another 7 people have recovered and allowed to go home, bringing the total number of people who have recovered to 60. The fight continues. Mark Namaswa, KTN News.
Quite chilling there from the CS, Mutahi Kagwe, as he broke down the numbers of COVID-19 confirmed cases in the residential areas across Nairobi. The virus is quite close to where you are. And remember, the virus does not move. It is you who moves. That is why some of those directives have been given by the government. The curfew, the 10-hour curfew, national curfew, from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m., which a lot of people have been flouting. We have been getting reports from the police. There is restriction of movement in and out of the 4 counties, that Nairobi, Kwale, Kilifi, and Mombasa. And that is what we want to focus on, the behavior of Kenyans. Mark, let me come to you. I mean, what happened, what the CS was reporting there, that group of Kenyans who traveled from Nairobi to Homa Bay, pretending to be mourners, it's quite, we seem to have lost Mark, but Dismas, that is, it looks very creative, but it is very sad and unfortunate because it is exactly what this country should not be doing at this, time or stage in the coronavirus outbreak, isn't it?
Yes, and we need to look at it from 2 levels. There's the Kenyan leadership, and also there's the normal citizen. And everybody has got the biggest responsibility to exercise self-responsibility. And I use responsibility twice because it's that self-responsibility which is going to stop the movement of the virus. And as indicated, It's the human beings who move the virus. The virus doesn't move on its own motion. Now, a few days ago, you saw there were allegations that the Prime Minister, in fact, went to outside the Nairobi metropolitan area where he went to visit a trade union leader. So one begins to wonder if the Prime Minister, who occupies a very special position in the Kenyan political space, is in breach of these protocols.
Former Prime Minister, you mean?
Yeah, former Prime Minister, my apologies. Is in breach of these protocols. Then what does he expect other Kenyans to do? So do we have a set of two rules? There's a set of rules for people with political assets and for morale. We need to get a serious leadership from that. And if indeed the allegations have been confirmed that the former Prime Minister moved out of the Nairobi metropolitan area, he needs to come up and offer his apologies. There's a second story about this coffee. When you speak to people back in the village, they actually claim that there was a funeral and that these people bought a coffin, an elegant coffin from Nairobi to go and use for funeral purposes. Right. Maybe that's something which needs to be verified.
Let me interrupt you a bit. We need to sort out your sound, Dismas. Ken, talk to us about the behavior of Kenyans. I mean, let's talk about ourselves. We have been talking about the government and its response to COVID-19, the economic response, the response in terms of, quarantining, tracking the suspected cases and trying to treat them, the capacity medically. What about our behavior in terms of just being responsible? We have had cases of people having house parties, even under quarantine. And now, people pretending to be mourners. There was another video on Twitter where there were people crammed into an ambulance and they were drinking or drunk, and that's an ambulance in the dead of the night. I mean, what does it say about us as a people?
Our behavior as a people is one thing. It is unfortunate that Kenyans have not taken the threat of this virus seriously. And it is partly because Kenyans behave like the biblical Thomas, who did not believe that Christ had resurrected until he had to go and touch the hand or something of the sort. Kenyans are making the CS Mutahi Kagwe and the government of Kenya appear like they are mourning more than the bereaved. We must devise a method of making Kenyans understand that this funeral is theirs. If they allow anyone else to mourn louder than them, then they are in deep trouble. Kenyans are becoming ignorantly creative, that you can feign a funeral just to get to your village. But again, Ben, this calls for a review and a thorough understanding of the process of getting delegated legislation. Remember, these COVID-19 regulations have been formulated by the ministries without direct participation of Parliament and the people. When you are making laws, rules, or regulations, if they have to be very effective, then you must bring in the aspect of public participation, either through the people themselves or their elected representatives. The people of Siaya have elected their leaders. People of Mombasa have their leaders who know and understand their unique cultural challenges. When you are making regulations telling the people of Mombasa in Nairobi to remain in Nairobi, their leader will tell you, under certain circumstances, let us allow our people to travel. And you lay out the procedure. Like presently, I think the Ministry of Internal Security has a procedure of letting people out of Nairobi, not just leaders, but even the common man. We saw the CAS for health saying, if you have a funeral, you will be cleared in a manner anticipated by the regulations. And therefore, we urgently need to consolidate all regulations relating to the prevention of COVID-19 and have Parliament go through with the view of giving them some public interest dimension. Otherwise, you cannot restrict a person from Siaya, for example, whose father has died, to travel. That person will even travel as a ghost and attend the burial.
So some of these behavioral lapses we are seeing, if you can call them that, as a result of a breakdown of communication between the people and the government.
People and government, and the failure of our security system. I am not buying this idea that these people were able to stage a play in Nairobi and act the play all the way to Homa Bay. It is not possible. We had some characters on the way in the name of police officers who were drawn into this play, and they facilitated.
All right. Mark, what is your take on the general behavior of Kenyans? Obviously, they are responsible Kenyans who have been taking all the measures to try and stay safe. But what is your take on the general conduct of us as a people in the wake of this global pandemic, you know, given the fact that we have the benefit of having watched people make some mistakes in terms of the restriction of movement, like happened in Italy and in parts of New York?
Ben, I don't think Kenyans are taking this matter seriously at all. I think Kenyans are believing that it's up to the government with its contact tracing and the quarantine centers, while a lot of Kenyans, the vast majority of Kenyans, are quite laissez-faire about this particular issue. I drove around the township of Kikuyu just to see how people are reacting last weekend, and what I saw was appalling. People were not keeping any form of social distance. People had turned roundabouts and exits into places where they could meet and drink, and people are not taking this seriously. And for me, if I'm to look at the incident in Homa Bay where the matatu driver turned out to be positive, there are lots of issues of concern there. That is akin of the crime of attempted murder, because you are violating a restriction. You are infecting people who are not prepared at all for such a thing, and most likely because whatever reason made them travel, they traveled for selfish reasons. And I think it is time that we told people in the Republic of Kenya that funerals and burials are not an emergency. Unless you are trying to revive the person from the dead, let's stop acting as though burying the dead is an emergency. It is not. And therefore, the excuses that Kenyans have for them putting themselves in danger is based on the fact that they believe that this thing is not as dangerous as they've been told. They believe that all of them will be like Brenda, they will get healed within 2 weeks, and therefore they're not taking it seriously. The problem is that when it does go viral, as the term is, then they will be in big trouble, because those are the most vulnerable populations. So the truth of the matter is we need to have a conversation as a society and begin to convince each other to stay at home. I totally disagree with Wakili though when he says that these rules need public participation. How? We are in an emergency situation. There is no way the president or the cabinet can sufficiently come up with public participation when they need to respond to some of these things real time. But my advice to Kenyans: stay at home. Burials are not an emergency. Weddings are not an emergency. And guess what? Partying is not an emergency either.
Dismas?
Well, you know, as I was saying earlier on, we see people doing extreme things, like the former Prime Minister in breach of those protocols. But when you come to the self-responsibility of a number of Kenyans, it's really appalling. And contrary to what most of the speakers have indicated, there are a number of Kenyans who've taken it seriously. If you go through the streets, you'll see somebody in a mask, people are sanitizing their hands, washing, and you could see, you see there's a general effort. But now we've got a few extreme scenarios. Like, for instance, how can a rational human being order for an ambulance to go and move around people from one location to another, people who've been drinking the entire night, and after doing that, they're still loose. They're still in the community. How can, as a nation, allow that? And there is no action has not been taken on that driver, on the person who gave instructions. That you have people who've been drinking probably the entire night. It could even be outside Nairobi. They did not respect the self-distancing rule, and then they come within the city, and the ambulance is not meant for that kind of purpose, and no action has been taken. Now, for the case of Homa Bay, the story doesn't seem to be adding up, but assuming that it's a factual story, is there any contact tracing which has been done? Is there any quarantine? And the people who are manning those roadblocks.
Why do you say the story does not add up?
Well, you know, when you speak, because I took the liberty to call a number of the locals to find out that are these my neighbors in Homa Bay, these mischievous, that in fact they can have they can sit down and create this story. And what I've been told is that there's somebody who died in the village, somewhere in Karachuonyo, and the fellas from Nairobi merely bought a nice coffin, an elegant coffin, consistent with their traditions, to give the person a decent
There are coffins in
send-off.
Homa Bay.
Sorry?
There are no coffins in Homa Bay.
Well, you know, people from that part of the world, and I risk getting stones, they like things to be done in a very elegant manner. So they bought a coffin from Nairobi. But assuming that even the story they're giving us is false, maybe they want to cover their tracks. But from Nairobi to Homa Bay, you go through 8 counties. How is it possible that you've gone through 8 governors, 8 county commissioners, and 8 county police commands, 8 of them, all the way from Nairobi from Nairobi to Homa Bay, and there's nobody among these 8 groups who is able to take notice of that there is a mischief going on. What one would have expected for the CS yesterday to say that this crime has taken place and a number of officers have been sorted out. You know, that one has not come into play. And then all over Nairobi, you see people having parties in the evening or throughout the night, engaging in all manner of mischief. And you've not seen a very strong action being taken against them. And then there is a big loophole that we need to sort out as a matter of emergency or urgency, this thing of essential service providers. So you've got a truck driver getting fuel all the way from Mombasa to Bujumbura. I don't know whether they've been tested for COVID or for this coronavirus, but imagine the kind of harm those people can do. Because you're moving 3 countries. You're moving from Nairobi, then you go to Uganda, then you go to Rwanda, then you go all the way to Burundi and back. Are these people being tested for this virus? Those are some of the things we need to look at. And in my view, as members of the National Assembly go back and expect to review these things, any breach of these public health protocols should be considered to be murder. That if you somebody like these truck drivers or any other person knowing that they are infected or they've got this virus and then transmit it to other people, if there's clear evidence, then they should be jailed. Because we can't afford to have people move into a bar at 6:30 in the evening and then they lock themselves at 7 o'clock, they drink through the night, they engage in all manner of, they break all the 10 commandments. At 5 o'clock, they're done with their sins, then they come mix with the rest of us and, transmit the virus. I think those are some of the loopholes we need to address.
So accusing finger at both the general population for not taking this seriously and the authorities as well for not enforcing this or for having loopholes, for being complicit in this. Bwana Wakili, is there a need, knowing the importance really of restricting movement in the face of coronavirus, is there a need for reviewing probably some of these directives, some of these measures that have been put in place in terms of trying to stop the spread of this virus?
Yes, there is urgent need. And what Kenyans must remember is the COVID-19 pandemic does not suspend our human rights. Our human rights must be respected, must remain intact, but we must have directives and regulations from government to guard the most fundamental human right, which is the right to life. Why am I saying that there is need to review these regulations? Apparently, and in my opinion, these regulations were made in a rush. They were made as an emergency and on an emergency basis. For example, Ben, what is so difficult with government giving a 3 days notice to people in these 4 counties who may want to travel, to move around or to go to their villages, to either go for checkup and self-quarantine and be helped to get out of Nairobi? It is more proper when a person is quarantined at the place of their choice. But if you lock people together, and human beings naturally are very rebellious, if you lock them together and you want to use law to address their issues, you are bound not to succeed. And then somebody that has, an institution that has failed us in this war, in enforcement of these regulations, I think is the Inspector General of Police. Why has he failed us? Remember that when the courts were shut down by the National Council on Administration of Justice, the Chief Justice made it very clear that the IG will come up with rules to address specific matters, such as when people are arrested during this curfew season, what happens to them? New arrests, how is bond and bail given? The IG has not issued a comprehensive statement relating to the conduct of the police and relating to the arrests or the crimes committed in violation of these regulations. This one has opened up the system for abuse. And if Kenyans realize that you're using these regulations, taking advantage of them to extort from unsuspecting Kenyans, they will rebel. When you go to the villages, it is worse. People are respecting the curfew rules, but they are being fished from their own homes, beaten up, and bribes demanded. Markets, people cannot access essential goods. The county enforcement officers have taken over, picking properties from traders. We can never have regulations that are meant to help the police or the county enforcement officers achieve ulterior motives. We need to review in such a way that these regulations can be enforceable.
Okay. And Mark was saying that it is not possible, what you said earlier, to have public participation in matters that are basically emergency issues.
It is possible because Parliament is meeting. Parliament is meeting every Wednesday, and we don't have to physically meet. You can use other methods to get public views. What we are trying to say, we are trying to protect against abuse of discretion by policymakers, by CS, by PS, and other players. We must protect public interest.
All right. Mark, even with the emergency, is it possible for the authorities to really make regulations and directives that are, puts into consideration the people? In fact, knowing that if you force people to do things, they are bound to, rebel, and then that works against you.
Well, as someone who understands how hard it is to get public participation to happen in this country and how long it takes, then it's impractical to say, for example, if we look at the restricted movement out of Nairobi and coastal counties, that decision had to be made before Easter. I wonder how much public participation would have been done, and I also wonder how you would have done it without letting the cat out of the bag, because had that announcement, if Nairobians had been given 3 days to think about it, I promise you there would have been a mass exodus out of Nairobi. Indeed, we did witness a lot of people trying to exit Nairobi. So these are extreme circumstances that require us to take sometimes extreme measures. And those measures mean that sometimes you will actually have to force your populations to do things which they are not happy with. And every country across the world has done that. Some countries have banned meeting of more than 2 people. Other countries, like the United Arab Emirates, have said, you know what, you stay in the house or you face fines. So the truth of the matter is the only way to handle this issue is a mix of things. There has to be a stick to make sure that people are sticking to the rules. There has to be carrot in terms of society and us talking to each other and convincing each other to stay home. But we have at the end of the day to use every resource and every tactic available to us in fighting this particular pandemic. And so far, our government has done quite well. We must commend them, and we must continue to cooperate with them, because as I've said before, in this particular issue, we only have one government. There's no time for opposition. There's no time for tanga-tanga, kieleweke. There's only time to fight COVID-19.
I urge you to stay home, be safe. If you don't have to move around, please stay in your houses. Stop the coronavirus from moving, because it does not move. It is you who move it. Let's take a quick commercial break here on Inside Politics. When we come back, we will be switching into some politics and focusing on the ruling Jubilee Party. The Secretary General, Raphael Tuju, under pressure as that row over the all-important National Management Committee